Henry and Evelyn Carver once raised 6 children through winters of hunger and summers of hard labor. Now, in the twilight of their years, they're left with nothing. No home, no savings, only a battered pickup and a 10-year-old German shepherd named Shadow. The snow that night was merciless, swallowing the road and their pride alike. As the bank's men loaded furniture onto trucks, Evelyn sat quietly, oxygen tube trailing, her frail hand resting on Shadow's head. He didn't understand loss, only loyalty. But what waited in the mountains would test both and awaken something divine beneath the snow. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. The wind over Silver Creek carried snow like ground glass, cutting through the frozen pines and swallowing sound. Inside the old truck, Henry Carver sat behind the wheel, his knuckles pale on the steering column. 72. Still broad-shouldered, though stooped by years of factory work, his once black hair had turned to white steel. His jaw was square, but the set of it tonight betrayed weariness more than strength. Next to him sat Evelyn, small and fragile, her silver hair tucked beneath a wool scarf. The oxygen tube traced from her nostrils to a tank at her feet, humming softly. Her eyes, still the pale green of spring water, stared through the windshield at the swirling blizzard ahead. In the back seat, their German shepherd, Shadow, 10 years old, half gray around the muzzle, watched every movement of his people with alert amber eyes. His thick winter coat bristled whenever the truck shuddered. The road curved upward into the Bitterroot Mountains, each turn narrower and crueler. Henry had driven this path before, decades ago when his father still mined here. Now the mines were gone, the mountain empty. His oldest son, Richard, had handed him the keys that morning in the rain, pretending generosity. "It's yours, Dad, grandfather's cabin. You'll have peace up there." But peace was a word that carried the chill of abandonment. 6 children, 6 different lives scattered across America, each too busy, too burdened to carry their parents any further. Evelyn broke the silence first, her voice faint but clear. "Did you bring the photographs?" Henry nodded toward a box wedged between the seats. "Every one of them. Birthdays, weddings, the house, even the one of Richard's first restaurant." "He'll forget he ever had one," she murmured. Her tone held no anger, only a tired sadness that came from loving too much and too long. The truck labored through drifts until the headlights caught a crooked sign. Raven Ridge, private road. Beyond it, the path became a single strip of white leading into darkness. Henry pressed on until the cabin appeared, a silhouette half buried in snow, its roof sagging like an old man's shoulders. The sight drew a low whistle from him. "So this is what they gave us." They stepped out into the storm. The cold bit instantly, sharp as teeth. Evelyn leaned on her cane, breath clouding around the tube. Shadow leapt down, paws sinking deep, and began circling the cabin, sniffing with purpose. Henry watched him, faint amusement crossing his features. "Still the soldier, huh, boy?" Inside, the air was stale with rot and mold. A single window remained intact, the rest were boarded or broken. Henry set down the lantern and surveyed the room. Overturned furniture, mouse droppings, the smell of damp wood. "We'll make it work," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Evelyn lowered herself onto a broken chair. "Do you remember when this place was full of people? When your father kept the fire going all night?" "I remember the sound of the pickaxes," he said softly, "and the way he used to curse the cold." Henry opened his toolbox, revealing wrenches polished from years of habit. The ritual of work steadied him. He cleared a space, gathered splintered boards, and built a small fire in the rusted stove. The flame flickered, weak but alive. As the room filled with a thin warmth, Evelyn's breathing eased. She studied her husband, the deep lines around his mouth, the scar along his jaw from the mill accident that nearly cost him his life. He had always carried pain quietly, the way some men carried pride. "You still think they'll visit?" she asked. Henry didn't answer. Instead, he adjusted the stove door, listening to the wind clawing at the walls. In his mind, he saw their children's faces, Richard the ambitious restaurateur, Emily the lawyer in Denver, twins Matthew and Sarah, one a nurse, the other an architect, Luke the gambler who never learned responsibility, and Thomas, the youngest, whose soft heart had hardened after the family's bankruptcy. 6 bright futures built on their parents' sacrifices. Now 6 strangers who couldn't share a phone call without talking about money. The wind howled through a crack in the wall, scattering ash across the floor. Henry rose to inspect it. The boards were spongy with rot. When he pressed harder, they groaned ominously. Damn thing's ready to collapse. He fetched a hammer, intent on patching it before night froze them alive. Shadow followed every step, his breath visible in the cold air. The dog had been a gift from their late neighbor, Officer Glenn, 10 years earlier. Glenn had said, "He's smart, maybe too smart. Treat him like a partner, not a pet." Shadow had proven it, guarding the house after Evelyn's illness, nudging her medicine closer when she forgot. Now, as Henry worked, the dog positioned himself between the door and the darkness outside, head high, tail still. Hours passed. The wind eased for a moment, and Henry dared to believe the night would settle. Then came the sound, a hollow crack beneath his feet. Before he could react, the floor gave way. He dropped through splintered boards, hitting his shoulder against something icy. The world spun white and black. "Henry!" Evelyn's cry sliced the air. She tried to rise but stumbled, the oxygen tank tipping beside her. The fire guttered. Shadow barked once, twice, then lunged forward. He vanished into the hole, claws scraping against wood. In the half-dark, Henry felt teeth close around his sleeve, strong and insistent. The dog braced, pulling with desperate power. Pain flared through Henry's arm, but he held on. Bit by bit, Shadow dragged him upward until his hands gripped the edge. Snow drifted through the broken floorboards, landing on Shadow's fur like silver dust. Henry collapsed beside him, chest heaving. "Good boy, my good boy." The dog whined softly, licking blood from Henry's wrist where splinters had torn the skin. Evelyn reached them, pale and trembling. "You could have died." "Almost did," he said with a strained smile. "Seems this house wants company underground." They patched the hole with what boards remained, too exhausted to speak. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting a faint red glow across their faces. Outside, the storm rose again, shrieking through the trees. Henry stared into the dying light and felt something inside him fracture. A slow, silent breaking of trust not in his children, but in the promise that family meant safety. Evelyn closed her eyes, whispering a prayer. Shadow lay between them, his head resting on Henry's boot, ears twitching at every sound from the forest. Somewhere beyond the storm, a wolf howled, long, mournful, distant. Shadow's ears lifted, but he didn't move. Henry looked toward the boarded window, where snowflakes gleamed against the dark like falling stars. "Maybe," he murmured. "The mountain's not done with us yet." The wind answered with another low moan, and from beneath the cracked floor came a faint metallic clang, something shifting in the depths, unseen. Henry turned sharply. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Evelyn's eyes opened, weary but alert. "Hear what?" He hesitated, listening again. Only silence, thick and waiting. Shadow lifted his head, nose twitching toward the floorboards, a low rumble in his chest. Henry exhaled slowly. "Nothing," he lied. "Just the house settling." But as he stared into Shadow's gleaming eyes, he saw reflection. Not of the fire, but of something moving beneath them. The mountain, it seemed, had just whispered back. Morning came thin and gray, the sky bruised with the remnants of the storm. Snow draped the cabin like a burial shroud, softening its decay. Henry Carver woke with stiffness in his back and a dull ache in his shoulder from the fall. He lay for a while, listening to the faint hiss of the wind under the door and the slow breathing of his wife beside him. Evelyn's face, pale against the wool blanket, seemed younger in the muted light. Shadow slept curled at her feet, his chest rising and falling steadily. The dog's fur was dusted with frost from the draft that crept through every crack. Henry rose quietly, stoking the fire until it caught. His breath fogged the air as he studied the patch he'd made over the broken floor. It held, though the boards bowed slightly. Beneath them, the faint clang from last night lingered in his memory like a question he wasn't ready to ask aloud. He stepped outside. The cold struck with immediate authority, slicing through his jacket. The world was silent except for the creak of trees under snow. He could see where the drift had swallowed half the truck. Nearby, Shadow's paw prints circled the cabin like a drawn line of loyalty. Henry smiled faintly. The dog appeared moments later, leaping through the snow, tail waving, muzzle dusted white. He carried in his mouth a piece of old fabric, torn canvas, stiff with age. "Where'd you get that?" Henry muttered, taking it. The fabric was printed with faded letters, Raven Mining Company. His father had worked under that name. Inside, Evelyn was awake, sitting by the stove with her oxygen tube draped over one shoulder. She was making weak tea from melted snow. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were alert. "You went out in this?" she asked softly. "Just checking the truck. Shadow found something. Old mining cloth. Might have belonged to my father." Evelyn looked at him over the steam of her cup. "Maybe he's still looking out for you." Henry shrugged, uncomfortable with talk of spirits. Yet as he warmed his hands near the fire, the memory of that metallic sound below the floor returned. "I'm going to take another look under there today," he said. "See what's making that noise. You almost died last night. I'll be careful." He glanced at Shadow. "He'll come with me." By midday, the storm clouds had thinned. Henry pried up one of the loose boards, revealing the narrow gap into the dark beneath the cabin. The air that rose was strangely warm, smelling of iron and earth. He lowered his lantern, its light trembling on slick stone. Shadow whined, pacing the edge. "You don't like it either, huh?" Henry muttered. He fetched a rope, looped it around a beam, and eased himself down. The space was larger than he expected, an unfinished cellar carved into rock, its walls wet with condensation. The beam from his lantern found something metallic, a rusted pipe running along the wall, part of the old mining ventilation system. Maybe. He knelt beside it. The pipe hummed faintly, vibrating under his fingertips. A sound, deep and slow, pulsed from within, like a heartbeat buried in stone. Above, Shadow barked sharply, tail high. The dog's silhouette framed in the hole trembled. Henry looked up. "Easy, boy. I'm fine." But the dog wouldn't stop barking. Then, with a thud, something shifted deeper in the dark. A loose stone rolled across the floor and struck Henry's boot. He swung the lantern toward the noise and froze. Against the far wall was a door, iron, half buried in packed earth. It was small, barely man-sized, with a wheel lock sealed by rust. On its surface, someone had carved initials into the metal, EC 1957, his father's mark. Henry's breath caught. He traced the letters with his calloused thumb, then turned the wheel. It groaned, but didn't move. He forced it again, and the latch cracked free with a sound like breaking bone. A gust of warm mineral air rushed out, smelling faintly of sulfur. He coughed, waving the fumes away. Inside the chamber, shelves lined the walls, jars of cloudy liquid, old tools, and a wooden crate stamped "Property of Raven Mining." He lifted the lid. Inside were glass bottles, each sealed with wax and labeled with fading handwriting. Thermal spring samples, East Ridge, 1957. "Henry?" Evelyn's voice echoed faintly from above, laced with fear. "What's happening down there?" "I'm fine," he shouted back, though his pulse thundered. "I found something your father might call impossible." When he climbed back up, he was coated in dust and half shaking. Evelyn was standing, gripping the wall for balance. "You're as pale as snow," she said. "There's a room down there. Looks like a lab. My father's initials are on everything. And there's heat, Evie, heat coming through the rock, warm enough to melt the frost." Evelyn sank back onto the chair, her face thoughtful. "You think it's one of those springs he used to talk about?" "Could be. If it is, we might survive this winter after all." That evening, as snow began to fall again, Henry studied one of the jars by lamplight. The liquid inside shimmered faintly, reflecting light like silver. Shadow sat close, eyes fixed on it. When Henry unsealed the wax, the air filled with a strange metallic scent, sharp yet somehow clean. Evelyn reached for the jar, curiosity overriding caution. "It looks alive," she whispered. Before Henry could stop her, she dipped a finger into the liquid. It was warm, impossibly so. "Evelyn." He caught her hand, but she only smiled faintly. "It doesn't hurt. It feels like something remembering me." Within minutes, the chronic tightness in her chest seemed to ease. Her breaths came steadier. She laughed softly, a sound he hadn't heard in months. "Henry, I can breathe." They stared at each other in disbelief. Then Shadow growled, low and urgent. The sound came again, the Heartbeat in the walls, stronger now, as if the mountain itself responded to their intrusion. The lantern flickered. Snow rattled against the windows. Henry moved to seal the jar again, but a drop of the liquid fell onto the wood floor. Where it touched, frost receded, revealing the dark grain beneath. That night, neither of them slept. Henry sat by the fire, the jar sealed and hidden in his pack. Evelyn rested with her head against his shoulder, whispering half-formed memories of the past. "Maybe this was your father's secret," she said. "Maybe he found something worth hiding." When dawn crept over the ridge, a figure appeared through the snowfall, a man trudging toward the cabin from the tree line. He was tall, wearing a heavy parka, his beard thick with frost. Shadow sprang to the window, barking sharply. Henry's hand went to the hatchet near the door. The stranger raised a gloved hand in peace. "Name's Daniel Pike," he called out. His voice was rough, older, but carried a soldier's authority. "My truck slid off the road last night. Saw your chimney smoke." Henry opened the door cautiously. Daniel stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. He was in his late 50s, built solid, with a weathered face marked by a long scar running from temple to jaw. His eyes, one hazel, one gray, had the wary alertness of a man who'd lived too long with danger. "Didn't mean to startle you folks," he said. "Just needed warmth." Evelyn poured him a cup of weak tea. Daniel thanked her with a polite nod, his gaze drifting to the patched floor. "Old mining ground here," he remarked. "You can feel it humming sometimes." Henry froze. "You've been up here before?" Daniel hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Long time ago. Worked these hills after the mine closed. Heard stories about your father, Carver, the man who found something the company didn't want known." Evelyn's cup trembled slightly. "And what was that?" Daniel looked from her to Henry, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Something that could make a man live forever. Or bury him trying." The room fell silent except for the fire's hiss. Shadow's ears twitched toward the floor, a low growl rising in his throat. Henry followed the dog's gaze. Beneath the boards, the heartbeat sound pulsed again, slow, deliberate, patient. And this time, Evelyn heard it too. The storm eased by morning, leaving a silence so heavy it seemed alive. The sun hung pale above Silver Creek, casting a weak light through the frost-cloaked pines. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low. Henry Carver stirred it back to life, watching the flames catch on the charred wood. Evelyn sat wrapped in blankets near the window, her color improved since touching the mysterious liquid. She was breathing almost normally now, her hands steady. For the first time in months, she looked less like a patient and more like the woman Henry had married 50 years ago. Shadow dozed beside her, his fur rising and falling with each slow breath. Daniel Pike stood near the stove, his parka unzipped, revealing a body still thick with muscle despite age. The scar on his face caught the firelight like a pale thread. He'd said little since arriving, but his eyes wandered off into the patched floor where the heartbeat of the mountain pulsed faintly beneath them. Henry poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to him. "So," Henry said, "you knew my father." Daniel accepted the cup, his gloved hands steady. "Worked under him, for a time. 1957. He was a foreman at the Raven Shaft when the company started digging too deep. Word was they hit a hot vein, water boiling out of the stone. Men thought it was a geothermal pocket. Your father called it something else. The breath of the earth." Henry leaned forward, curiosity tightening his voice. "And what happened?" Daniel's gaze drifted to the window, to the snow still falling. "2 men died trying to cap the flow. After that, your father sealed the shaft himself. He said it wasn't meant for us." Evelyn's voice, soft but firm, cut through the quiet. "But he didn't seal it completely, did he? There's still something down there." Daniel hesitated. "Maybe. I left before it was done. The company paid me off to keep quiet after the collapse. I was 21 and already tired of burying friends. Never came back until now." Henry watched the man's face, a map of survival etched by regret. He could see that Daniel wasn't lying. Whatever haunted him was older than this mountain. By noon, Daniel insisted on helping reinforce the cabin. They worked outside under a gray sky while Shadow trotted between them, his paws sinking deep in snow. The dog moved with new energy, the wound from the previous night already healed. Henry noticed it, but said nothing. He hammered planks in silence, thinking about his father and the glowing jar hidden beneath the bed. When the work was done, they rested on a log near the frozen stream behind the cabin. The air smelled faintly of pine sap and iron. Daniel smoked a hand-rolled cigarette, the smoke curling blue. "You know," he said, "places like this, they don't forget who walked them. The mountain remembers." Henry snorted. "Mountains don't remember. People do." Daniel smiled without humor. "Then tell me why you saw it. Still hear your father's hammer when the wind hits the valley." Evelyn joined them, wrapped in her wool coat. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, a healthy pink. "Whatever that spring is," she said, "it's not ordinary water. I felt something when I touched it, like warmth from inside my lungs, not from the outside. I think it's alive." Daniel flicked ash into the snow. "Alive or not, it killed men once. You should stay clear of it." Henry frowned. "You said the same about mining, and we still dug." The conversation died there. But that night, when the others slept, Henry rose quietly. The faint hum below the cabin called to him like a whisper in the dark. He took his lantern, opened the floor hatch, and descended into the cellar once more. The air was warmer now, moist with a metallic tang. The iron door stood open from before, and the glass jars shimmered faintly, as though stirred by invisible light. He carried one jar outside. The night was moonless, stars sharp as nails. He poured a drop of the liquid into the snow. Steam rose instantly, melting a circle of frost until dark earth showed beneath. Beneath that, he saw something move, slow and luminous, like veins of light spreading through soil. His breath caught. A sudden bark broke his trance. Shadow had followed him, tail low, ears back. The dog's eyes glowed amber in the lantern's halo. Henry whispered, "Easy, boy, we're not doing harm." But Shadow's gaze stayed fixed on the ground. Then the light in the soil flared once, bright as a pulse before fading away. Henry returned inside, shaken. Daniel was awake, sitting by the fire with his rifle across his knees. "You went down there," Daniel said flatly. Henry didn't bother denying it. "It's not poison, it heals." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "That's what your father said, right before the mine caved in." Evelyn stirred awake. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Henry lied again. But the lie hung between them like frost. The next morning, the world outside gleamed in sunlight. The storm had passed completely, leaving the trees heavy with snow that sparkled like glass. Evelyn woke early, her breathing easy, her movements quick. She cooked breakfast without oxygen for the first time in years. "I feel like I'm 20 again," she laughed. "Henry, maybe this place really is a gift." Daniel ate in silence, his expression unreadable. Shadow lay near the door, ears twitching. Midway through the meal, he stood abruptly and began to growl, deep and low. Everyone froze. A moment later came the crunch of boots outside. Then 3 shapes emerged from the tree line, men in thick coats, rifles slung on their backs. The first man to approach was lean and sharp-featured, his beard trimmed short, eyes pale as ice. He carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "Morning," he called, smiling without warmth. "Name's Calvin. We're with the county survey team. Just checking the properties after the storm." Daniel's hand tightened on his rifle. "Survey team doesn't carry hunting rifles." Calvin's smile widened. "Smart man. Then maybe you'll let us warm up by your fire." Henry stepped forward. "We're not looking for trouble." Calvin's gaze swept over the cabin, then lingered on the floor where heat faintly shimmered. "Wouldn't dream of trouble, sir. Just curious what keeps a fire burning so strong in an empty valley." Evelyn clutched her coat, unease flickering across her face. Shadow barked once, sharp and warning. Calvin's men exchanged glances. One reached inside his coat. Daniel lifted his rifle. "I wouldn't," he said evenly. For a heartbeat, the world held still, the only sound the wind moving through pines. Then Calvin raised his hand slowly, grinning. "All right, old-timer. No need for nerves. We'll be on our way." He tipped his cap and the 3 men turned back toward the trees. But as they vanished into the white, Henry caught sight of a mark on Calvin's sleeve. Raven Mining Company embroidered in faded gold thread. That night, the heartbeat under the cabin grew louder. Evelyn couldn't sleep. Shadow paced endlessly, ears back, as if hearing something only he could understand. Henry sat awake by the window, watching the dark tree line. Daniel cleaned his rifle with deliberate calm, his face unreadable. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "And when they come, they won't ask permission." Henry nodded. "Then we'd better find out what's worth dying for under this mountain." From beneath the floor came another pulse, louder, closer, followed by the faint sound of rushing water, like breath drawn deep into the earth. Shadow stopped pacing, head turning sharply toward the hatch. His eyes gleamed gold in the firelight. The mountain had begun to wake. The next week arrived with a cold so deep it made even the trees groan. Silver Creek lay locked in ice, and the cabin's roof carried a white weight that glittered beneath a sun too weak to warm. Henry Carver stood by the window, his breath fogging the glass, watching the road below twist through the pines. He hadn't seen another soul since Calvin and his men vanished, but something inside him knew they hadn't gone far. Shadow lay stretched across the threshold, tail flicking, ears twitching at every far-off crunch of snow. The dog hadn't relaxed since that morning. Evelyn hummed softly as she packed tins and blankets into a wooden chest. Her energy still amazed him. Her skin glowed faintly pink, her eyes bright as if lit from within. Whatever lived in that spring had changed her, drawn youth back into her bones, but it also scared Henry. "Don't you think it's strange?" he asked quietly. "How quick you're healing." She smiled without looking up. "After all these years, you question a blessing?" He didn't answer. Blessings from mountains seldom came without cost. Late that afternoon, Shadow barked once, low, decisive. Henry turned to the window and froze. 6 figures trudged up the slope, his children. Richard led, still tall, his city coat shining black against the snow. Behind him, Emily, wrapped in fur, then the twins, Matthew and Sarah. He, a heavy man with a banker's face. She narrow, sharp-jawed, lips tight. Luke the drifter, scarf loose, eyes shifty. And finally Thomas, the youngest, wearing a cap too small and carrying no arrogance at all. Evelyn's hands went still. "They came?" "Yeah," Henry murmured, "like wolves smelling something worth taking." When the door opened, warm air spilled out into the cold. Richard stepped in first, brushing snow from his shoulders. "We were worried," he said smoothly, though his gaze slid to the patched floor. "You stopped answering calls." "No signal," Henry said, "and no need." Emily sniffed at the air. "This place smells like sulfur." "It smells like survival," Evelyn replied, standing straighter than she had in months. The family gathered awkwardly around the fire. Matthew poured brandy from a silver flask, offering none to his father. "Heard there's something valuable up here, Dad. Some geothermal discovery? The company men mentioned you." Henry felt Daniel stiffen beside him. The ex-miner leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his scar catching the firelight. "Company men talk too much," he said. Sarah crossed her arms. "If it's real, you can't just sit on it. This could pay for proper care, doctors, everything you need." "I've got what I need," Henry replied, "and that's not for sale." Luke laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "You're living in a shack, old man. Don't make this a crusade." Thomas shifted uneasily. "Maybe we should listen first. It's his land." Emily turned on him. "Don't start, Tom. You always take their side." The argument swelled until Evelyn raised her hand. "Stop. We didn't ask you here. But since you are, eat, rest. The storm's coming again tonight. Then we'll talk." Dinner passed in silence. Daniel watched them all with soldier's calm, saying little. When the wind began to moan outside, Evelyn excused herself, stepping out to the porch for air. The snow had started again, fine, sharp crystals swirling in silver spirals. She looked up at the ridge. Somewhere beneath it, the spring pulsed. She could almost hear it calling, not with sound but with warmth, a pull in her chest. Behind her, footsteps crunched. It was Thomas. He was 28 now, face lean, eyes full of quiet guilt. "Mom," he said softly, "I didn't want to come. They made me. I told them you'd never sell." She smiled sadly. "You were always the kind one. I wasn't kind when it mattered." His eyes shone. "When you got sick, I left because I couldn't watch you fade." Evelyn touched his cheek. "Then maybe this mountain gave us both a second chance." Inside, voices rose again. Richard arguing with Daniel about ownership, Emily demanding proof of value, Matthew asking for the jars. Henry stood silent, gripping his chair, every word scraping his patience raw. Finally, he said, "There's no treasure here, just a place that remembers mercy. You all forgot what that means." Before anyone could answer, Shadow lunged to the door, barking furiously. The window panes rattled. Outside, faint lights flickered between the trees, lanterns moving fast. Calvin and his men, 6 silhouettes against the snow, rifles slung low. Daniel's eyes hardened. "They're coming back." The family crowded the windows. Richard cursed. "Who are they?" "Trouble," Henry said. "Get Evelyn inside." But Evelyn was already on the porch, snow whipping around her like white fire. The men were close now. One shouted, "We just want to talk, Mr. Carver." But the metallic click of a rifle carried clearer than any word. Daniel lifted his weapon, stance calm, deliberate. "Henry," he said without turning, "if they want what's under here, they'll burn the cabin to take it." Henry felt the mountain's heartbeat rise beneath his feet, stronger than ever, drumming through the floorboards. Evelyn turned toward the ridge, eyes wide. "It's waking," she whispered. "Henry, it's waking up." Shadow stood beside her, fur bristling, a low growl rolling deep in his chest. Snow swirled harder, wind shrieking through the valley. Behind them, the 6 children huddled together, fear melting arrogance. And somewhere beneath the earth came a deep, echoing crack, as though the mountain itself was splitting open to breathe. Henry stepped onto the porch, eyes fixed on the advancing lights. "If the mountain wants a fight," he muttered, "then it picked the right family." The wind swallowed his words. Then, from beneath the cabin, a dull orange glow began to seep through the floorboards. The mountain had chosen its moment. Chapter 5. The Legacy of Shadow, 600 words. The storm broke with the violence of an awakening god. The wind screamed through the pines, snow twisting into white walls that swallowed light and sound alike. The mountain trembled underfoot, deep and rhythmic, its heartbeat now unmistakable. Inside the cabin, lanterns swayed, shadows leaping across the walls like restless spirits. Henry Carver stood by the door, rifle in hand, his eyes steady but old. Beside him, Daniel Pike watched the tree line through the swirling snow. "They're circling," Daniel said. "If they rush, we won't hold long." Evelyn sat near the hearth, her children gathered around her, fear breaking the pride that had once divided them. The youngest, Thomas, gripped her hand tightly. "We can't fight them," he said. "We need to get you out." Evelyn shook her head, her voice calm. "You can't run from a mountain, son. You face it, or it buries you." Then the ground shook. A flash of orange light burst through the floorboards, casting their faces in a molten glow. The jars beneath the cabin had cracked. Steam poured upward, filling the air with a metallic heat. Shadow barked wildly, darting to the hatch. "No!" Henry shouted, but the dog had already forced it open and plunged into the fiery dark below. The noise outside grew, Calvin and his men shouting through the storm. Gunfire cracked, the sound muffled by wind. Daniel returned fire once, sharp and controlled. Then, from below, came a roar, not human, not earthly. The board split, and a column of glowing water erupted through the floor, hissing against the cold air. It rose like a living thing, lighting the cabin in gold. Evelyn gasped, her eyes reflecting the shimmer. "It's the spring," she whispered. "It's alive." Shadow's silhouette appeared within the glow, climbing back from the fissure, his fur steaming, eyes burning with strange amber light. He stood before the door, the living embodiment of the mountain's will. The moment Calvin's men broke through, Shadow leapt. The air exploded in light. Henry saw everything at once, the intruders thrown backward, snow melting around them, the ground splitting open beneath their feet. The roar became wind, the wind became silence. When the light faded, the storm was gone. Snow fell again, soft and slow. The cabin still stood, though half its floor had caved into a glowing pit now calm and still. Henry dropped his rifle and went to his knees beside Shadow. The dog's fur was damp, warm to the touch. Eyes half closed. "Good boy," he whispered. "You brought it back to sleep." Shadow wagged his tail once and laid his head against Henry's boot. His breathing slowed, then stopped. Evelyn's tears glistened in the glow. Thomas knelt beside her, and one by one the others followed. Richard first, then Emily, the twins, even Luke, each silent, humbled. Outside, dawn touched the ridge, painting the snow in rose and silver. The mountain no longer trembled, it rested. Weeks later, when the thaw came, they buried Shadow near the spring, where the earth was always warm. The children stayed to rebuild the cabin into a refuge. Stone foundation, new roof, open doors for wanderers who'd lost their way. They called it the Carver Sanctuary, though everyone in the valley soon called it simply Shadow's Rest. On the final morning before spring, Henry sat on the porch beside Evelyn, both wrapped in blankets. She leaned her head on his shoulder, her breathing easy, her eyes on the sunrise. From the woods came the sound of small paws crunching through frost. A young German shepherd pup, black-coated, eyes pale gold, stepped into the clearing, nose lifted toward the cabin. Henry smiled faintly. Seems the mountain keeps its promises. Evelyn reached out her hand as the pup approached, resting its head against her palm. Behind them, the rebuilt cabin shimmered with the soft light of morning, and from somewhere deep within the earth, faint and steady, came the slow heartbeat of peace. In the quiet after the storm, the mountains stood like an altar of light, still, radiant, eternal. Henry and Evelyn's story reminds us that sometimes, when the world forgets us, God does not. He hides his miracles not in gold or fortune, but in faith, in endurance, and in the creatures who love without question. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a messenger, a guardian sent to remind humanity that love, loyalty, and sacrifice are the truest forms of divine grace. The spring beneath the cabin was not magic, it was mercy, a symbol that healing comes to those who believe when all else is lost. And like Henry and Evelyn, each of us walks through winters of our own, seasons of loneliness, loss, or abandonment. But if we listen closely, in the silence, in the snow, in the faithful heartbeat of the ones beside us, we might still hear God whisper, "You are not forgotten." If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it, leave a comment, and subscribe for more tales that remind us of hope, redemption, and miracles hidden in ordinary lives. And tonight, may you pray a little longer for those who have lost their faith in love. And may the Lord bless everyone watching, with warmth in their homes, courage in their hearts, and a guardian spirit like Shadow watching over them. May God bless you and your loved ones, always.